it's really a mourning of the loss of life as we know it. And I know that that sounds dramatic, but it really is the case. We are mourning our life as we know it. And so when we talk about the stages of grief, one of the big ones is denial. And I hear a lot of people express, yeah, when this is over, we're going to go back to the way things used to be. That's denial, because there is no back to the way things used to be. Life as we know it is different. There's so much uncertainty around information, around the validity of information, whether or not that information is true. So there's so many different factors that I think add to, our anxiety around COVID-19 and add to our feelings of uncertainty regarding when this will be over and what it will look like when it's over. So when we talk about, it's not just, COVID-19 is not just an epidemiological crisis, it's a psychological one. And so the situation provokes, as I said, anxiety, stress, and sadness. And it's also it's a time of collective sorrow. So we're all mourning that loss. And a big one that we're mourning, and we'll talk more about it, is safety. It's like, where am I safe? Like, people who I used to feel safe around, I'm not sure anymore. If I can be safe, if I can take my mask off. So when we talk about safety, it's not just the macro, like feeling safe in the world, but it's also the micro, it's feeling safe in our personal relationships as well. And so it talks about what is collective grief. And for the purposes of this talk, I thought this definition really fit, that collective grief is experiencing grief in the context of knowing many others are experiencing that grief as well. So we're grieving, and we're all grieving together. And we recognize we're having the same experience. And this is unparalleled. Like, we usually have experiences where there are pandemics, but they're over there. Now we're all experiencing it. So it levels it. Everyone is experiencing the same thing. We're all mourning and grieving this loss collectively. And so it's experiencing grief even if you don't lose a loved one. So for many people, it's really been a very difficult in terms of them managing, their sense of self or identity, how they've identified themselves. Because, for many people, they've lost jobs, they've been furloughed, for other people, it's been them having to modify how they spend money, or having to make other modifications as well. And so it kind of helps you to recognize how we center ourselves around certain things, or how we attach to certain things, and how powerful those attachments are, and how much they are indicative of who we are and how we identify ourselves. So I thought this is a really powerful picture, when it talks about I am, and like all the ways that we identify ourselves. And this pandemic has kind of shrunk all those things down significantly. And I think, too, on the positive end of it, in terms of shaking our sense of self, I think what it has done for many people is it's forced us to reconnect with ourselves in ways that we hadn't before. And it's removing all of the distractions. So, not having the outings. For some people, it's now they're getting back to reading, or getting back to connecting with people in their home, like their children. Like, I have many clients who speak about like having more time to spend with their children. So when we talk about adaptive coping, that would be some of the things that you see listed here, like journal writing, mindfulness practices, utilizing supports through, safe ways like text calls, Zoom calls, etc., exercise, as well as, finding meaning, but there are also, maladaptive ways that people cope. They use external measures to fix what's going on inside. Temporary measures like food, like drugs, like alcohol, sex, shopping, for many people, work, if they're using to temporarily, medicate, escape what they're feeling. So the first thing is we must name it. So being able to identify what it is that we're experiencing, we're grieving, we're feeling anxious, we're feeling depressed, like being able to name what it is that we're experiencing, because we can't heal or cope with what we won't acknowledge. And getting a qualified mental health professional or support group to unpack and give language to and process the grief. So giving, language, meaning like giving the words that are necessary to articulate what we're experiencing. So if I don't know I'm grieving, I just know I'm angry, then I'm focusing on the anger, but recognizing that anger is a stage or a part of my process of grief. And so being able to understand that enables me to more effectively cope and manage. journal writing. So being able to identify losses and also ways to move forward or cope with those losses. Some people have had many challenges with sleep. So there have been sleep disturbances for many people. So being able to create a sleep ritual, being able to set a consistent enough bedtime to create structure for your day, a bedtime, time that you wake up. Working from home for many people, there's not a lot of structure. And for many people who aren't accustomed to working at home, it can be very difficult. And the days can seem to kind of meld into each other. So being able to create structure in your day by having a time you wake up, a time you go to bed, having a structured schedule, is also helpful for many people. And with mindfulness practices, meditation, yoga, grounding techniques are especially helpful now when we think about, that we are all in a heightened state because of what we're experiencing. And, anxiety, depression, it's in our bodies as well. Our bodies are definitely remembering what we're experiencing, what we experienced day one up until this point. And so meditation is something that helps with getting the amygdala, which is that fight, flight, or freeze or flee part of our brain offline and getting back to the prefrontal cortex, which helps us to think rationally and be able to make good decisions and choices in terms of how we're going to cope. So yoga and grounding techniques can be mental grounding, soothing grounding, physical grounding. So mental grounding, an example of that would be meditation or visualization techniques. Yoga is, I'm sure everyone's familiar with yoga, but the benefit of it is that mind-body connection as well as breath connecting with body. And then grounding techniques, other grounding techniques would be soothing techniques, such as calling a family member or a friend who we feel safe and comforted by. Sometimes eating a little comfort food, but just things that bring us comfort and make us feel safe. And then the increase in utilization of social support through like texting, calling, Zoom calls, etc. Those are things that I encourage many individuals to do. Because of that, we're all missing that hug and that connection with other people. So being able to consistently and intentionally do that is something that's very important. And exercise, movement definitely helps with managing our mood. So getting out and going for walks, etc. And then the last thing that's listed here is identifying the gifts of our suffering. That's a big one. And that helps to shift our perspective to one of gratitude, as opposed to focusing on what's lost, being able to focus on how our lives have been transformed as a result of the loss. We all want to be informed, and that's been very challenging for many people, is like kind of inundating themselves with information. And so one of the biggest things has been to assess readiness. And that's one of the big suggestions I have, assessing your readiness to hear or to read or to see what you're about to go on, whether it be social media, whether it be an email, whatever it is you're going to access, just assessing your readiness to do so. And then determining how much time you're going to spend. So you're setting parameters around it. How much time am I going to go on social media? And being able to stay within the confines of that time frame that you've set. Identifying at least 2 reputable sites. So for me, it's been the CDC and the World Health Organization. And I signed up for emails for each of them. And that way I can prepare myself to read an email versus scrolling through a social media site and just seeing things that I can't unsee or reading things that are now in my head. The most important one is having a plan for what you're going to do when you come off. So for most of us, we come off and then we go right from that and we start talking about it. So especially if we have a spouse, or we have a loved one, or we get on the phone and we talk, did you know that? And we continue to talk about it. So we never give ourselves an opportunity to emotionally manage our emotional state after we come off. So it's very triggering. Much of what we're seeing, reading, and seeing can be very triggering. So having a plan. So maybe if you're going to call a friend, calling a friend and just talking about something other than that. Being able to call your therapist or pray for those who pray, or meditate, watching a lighthearted show, like something, I don't know if necessarily comedy would be most appropriate, but just something that's light and that may be, comforting or fun. Going for a walk, going for a run, working out. If you have a pet, giving that pet some love. but something that you're doing after intentionally to take care of yourself. So sometimes we can just kind of pick up our phone and we're just scrolling and we're not really paying attention to how it's affecting us. So before, during, and after, you're staying aware of yourself while you're accessing information. Because of course we want to stay informed, but we also want to make sure that we're mentally and emotionally okay after we come off.